The date is March 8, 2014. At Kuala Lumpur International Airport, the midnight hour is alive with restless energy. Travelers shuffle through bright terminals, some clutching boarding passes, others dragging weary children. Outside, the humid Malaysian air carries the familiar smell of jet fuel and the low roar of engines spooling up. On the tarmac sits a gleaming Boeing 777-200ER, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. Its destination, Beijing, China. Its journey, a 6-hour hop across the South China Sea, a routine flight flown countless times before. Inside the aircraft, 239 people settle in. Some slip into sleep as soon as their seatbelts click. Others scroll through phones, sending final messages. See you soon. I've boarded safely. Families whisper about reunions. Business travelers open laptops, working under dim cabin lights. Flight attendants, crisp in uniform, move methodically through the aisles. At the controls, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, 53 years old, a veteran pilot with more than 18,000 hours of flying experience. Beside him, First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, just 27, fresh-faced, weeks away from qualifying as a captain himself. At 12:41 a.m., the plane accelerates, roars down the runway, and lifts gracefully into the night sky. The city lights fall away. The cabin dims. Passengers breathe deeply, settling into the rhythm of flight. For the first 40 minutes, everything is ordinary. Then, at 1:19 a.m., a calm voice crackles over the radio. Good night, Malaysian 370. It is the last anyone will ever hear from the flight. Moments later, MH370 vanishes from civilian radar. No distress call, no emergency squawk, just silence. A plane the size of a skyscraper, carrying hundreds of lives, has disappeared into the night, and with it, the world's sense of certainty. How does a modern aircraft vanish in an age of satellites, GPS, and constant surveillance? Where did it go? And why, after the largest search in aviation history, are we still without answers? This is not just a story of a missing plane. It is a story of families torn apart, investigators chasing shadows, and a haunting question that lingers in the skies. This is the mystery of Flight MH370. Flight MH370's plan was simple. Depart Kuala Lumpur, climb northeast across the South China Sea, cross into Vietnamese airspace, and continue to Beijing. The manifest told a story of ordinary lives. 153 Chinese passengers, many returning from vacation. A group of Malaysian students on their way to begin studies abroad. Business travelers, couples, young children. 12 crew members, professionals trusted to guide the flight safely. Among them was Philip Wood, a 50-year-old American engineer working in China. Jiang Hui, a young Chinese man, awaited his mother's return. Children as young as 2 years old boarded with their parents, drifting to sleep as the engines hummed. The Boeing 777 was among the safest aircraft in the skies. Designed for endurance, redundancy, and resilience, it had been the workhorse of global aviation for decades. MH370 itself had logged thousands of safe flights. First, everything was routine. The climb to cruising altitude, the smooth handoff between controllers, the calm voice of Captain Zahari saying goodnight, and then a chilling break in the script. At 1:21 a.m., MH370's transponder, the electronic heartbeat that identifies it on radar, went silent. The blip that controllers had been watching disappeared. At first, air traffic control assumed a technical glitch. Planes sometimes flicker off radar briefly, but minutes stretched into half an hour. Controllers in Kuala Lumpur called Ho Chi Minh City. "Do you have MH370? The answer was no. Confusion grew. Malaysia thought Vietnam had it. Vietnam thought Malaysia was tracking it. Neither realized the truth. The plane was gone. But what radar would later show suggested MH370 hadn't simply vanished. It had turned back. Civilian radar screens showed only silence. But military radar, sweeping deeper, told a different story. At 1:30 a.m., MH370 reappeared, not heading north toward Beijing, but turning west, back across the Malaysian peninsula. The aircraft made sharp, deliberate maneuvers. It descended to low altitudes, skirting under radar coverage, moving with a precision only a skilled pilot could manage. Over Penang Island, Zahari's hometown, the aircraft seemed to linger. Military analysts later suggested it performed a subtle turn, almost as if circling, almost as if pausing. Then it pushed northwest toward the Andaman Sea. At 2:22 a.m., it disappeared from radar completely. A Boeing 777, the size of a football field, had slipped into darkness. How? Why? Who was in control? Somewhere in those 60 minutes, MH370 went from a routine passenger flight to an aviation ghost. And while families slept in Kuala Lumpur and Beijing, their loved ones soared into the unknown. But even as radar lost the plane, faint signals would whisper of its continued flight for hours more. In Beijing Capital International Airport, dawn broke. Families gathered at Gate E7, holding flowers, balloons, banners. Children tugged at parents' sleeves, asking, "When will they come out?" The arrival board flickered. Delayed. Minutes became hours. Airline staff whispered nervously. Then, the announcement. The plane is missing. Chaos erupted. Mothers sobbed, clutching phones that rang unanswered. Fathers yelled, demanding answers. Some families collapsed to the floor, wailing. Others stared blankly, unable to comprehend. In Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia Airlines officials herded relatives into conference rooms. They handed out brief statements. Contact lost. Search and rescue is underway. But confusion, contradictions, and silence bred rage. Families accused the airline of hiding the truth. "Where are they?" shouted one man. "Tell us something." News cameras captured faces contorted in grief, voices trembling with disbelief. How do you grieve when you don't know? How do you cling to hope when silence is all you're given? While families waited for news, search teams began scouring the wrong ocean. At first, searchers looked to the South China Sea, convinced MH370 had gone down near Vietnam. Dozens of aircraft and ships swept the waters. Nothing. Not a seat cushion, not an oil slick. Then came the revelation. Satellite pings. The British firm Inmarsat detected faint handshakes, automatic connections between MH370 and satellites every hour. These proved the plane had not crashed near Vietnam. Instead, it had flown for nearly 7 more hours after disappearing from radar. 2 possible corridors emerged: north over Central Asia, south into the empty vastness of the Indian Ocean. Analysis pointed south. Suddenly, the search shifted thousands of miles west, into waters deeper, stormier, more unforgiving. Ships towed sonar arrays across the seabed, mapping places no human eyes had ever seen. Searchers thought they were close, but the Indian Ocean is vast, and it gave nothing back. Then, in 2015, the ocean did speak. A fragment washed ashore, and the mystery grew darker still. A beachcomber on Réunion Island, east of Madagascar, stumbled across a barnacle-covered hunk of metal. It was a flaperon, part of a Boeing 777's wing. Tests confirmed it belonged to MH370. It was the first solid evidence that the plane ended in the Indian Ocean. More fragments followed. A wing flap in Tanzania, cabin panels in Mozambique, interior pieces in Madagascar. But they raised as many questions as they answered. The pieces showed signs of high-speed impact, but no fire. Some were eerily intact, as if the plane hit water in one violent, singular moment. For families, the debris was a cruel reminder. Their loved ones were gone. But how? Why? If the wreckage was there, why not the black boxes? Why no trace of the main fuselage? The debris confirmed death, but not truth. And in the absence of truth, theories multiplied. Theories swirled, each more haunting than the last. Pilot suicide? Some investigators pointed to Captain Zahari. A respected pilot, yes, but flight simulator data at his home showed routes into the Indian Ocean. Was this preparation or coincidence? Friends and family defended him fiercely, saying he was devoted, not suicidal. Hijacking? Could terrorists or rogue actors have seized control? Yet no group claimed responsibility. No demands were ever made. Mechanical failure? Could a sudden fire, electrical failure, or depressurization have knocked out communications and left the plane to drift on autopilot? But how to explain the deliberate turns across Malaysia? Military action? Whispers grew of a shoot-down, perhaps by accident, perhaps covered up. If so, why the silence from governments with powerful radars? Every theory seemed possible, yet each left gaps, unanswered questions, chilling silences. What was happening in the cabin during those hours of flight? Were passengers awake, terrified, or unconscious, oxygen masks dangling uselessly? The satellite data painted one last haunting picture, the ghost flight into oblivion. Inmarsat's data showed MH370 continued south, into the Indian Ocean, for nearly 7 hours. At 8:19 a.m., the final handshake occurred. Then nothing. Experts believe the plane exhausted its fuel. The engines flamed out. The aircraft, massive and silent, spiraled into the sea. But what of the passengers? Were they conscious? Did they know? Did they pound on cockpit doors in vain? Or had they slipped into unconsciousness hours before, never knowing their fate? The idea of a ghost flight, hundreds of souls carried silently into the void, unaware, chills investigators and families alike. One analyst called it a death shrouded in silence. For the families, it is the silence that torments. Silence where answers should be. Silence where closure should live. And even as the ocean swallowed the truth, families demanded accountability. Years have passed. The search covered more than 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor, the largest in aviation history, cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet MH370 remains unfound. Families still gather every March. They hold photos of loved ones, light candles, release lanterns into the sky. Their grief is raw, their questions sharp. Governments have closed inquiries, calling the case unsolvable without the wreckage. But families reject this. We want truth, they cry. We want answers. How can 239 people vanish in our modern age? How can satellites track our phones, but not a Boeing 777? MH370 is not just about aviation. It is about trust, about how governments, airlines, and technology failed 239 people and the world. It is about the human cost of uncertainty. A father's chair forever empty. A child who grew up never knowing why their mother never came home. Promise broken not by choice, but by silence. Flight MH370 was meant to be ordinary. Instead, it became extraordinary, not for its journey, but for its disappearance. It is a story of loss, of technology's limits, of silence louder than answers. It forces us to ask, how can a plane vanish in an age where the world is constantly watched? And if it can happen once, could it happen again? Perhaps the truth lies on the seabed, 2 miles below the surface, waiting for discovery. Perhaps it is locked forever in the black boxes that have never been found. Perhaps it vanished with the passengers, their voices carried only by the wind. But one fact remains. 239 souls took off that night, and not one returned. What do you think happened? Leave your theory in the comments. Someone out there knows the truth. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to subscribe to Captain Justice True Stories.